without further ado, I'm Annabelle Dunstan, and I'm the founder of an organisation called Question and Retain, and we measure and manage employee engagement and client satisfaction. And I'm the co-chair of the employee engagement group for the PRCA. So welcome. This event was due to take place in March, but due to the very sad events with the loss of Francis Ingham, the DG, we postponed, quite rightly so, and here we are re-meeting in May. So thanks to you for those, for your understanding and for rejoining us if you'd already registered back in March. I'm going to hand over and ask each of our panelists to give a very brief introduction, and then we're going to kick off with some questions. So Joanna, can I come to you first, just a little pen portrait for a couple of minutes about your role and what you do in internal comms?
Sure. My name is Joanna Parsons. I work as Director of Colleague Experience with a global tech company called Bentley Systems. I was previously Head of Internal Communications with the Irish National Police Force. I did that during COVID. I've worked in internal comms for more than 10 years. I sit on the board of directors with the Institute of Internal Communication. I write my own internal comms blog at joannaparsons.com. And I also teach a class on strategic internal communication with the Public Relations Institute of Ireland. And I am also a remote work enthusiast. I work fully remotely. And I really want to show that you can do a senior comms role fully remotely and do it really well. That's me.
Fantastic. I love it that you're championing that with your trusty cat at your side in the background there. Aniisu, can I come to you? Get a little introduction, please.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Aniisu Verghese, and I'm based in Krakow, Poland. I am an internal communications and change leader. I've worked in internal comms for over 15 years with companies like Tesco, Sabre, Sapient, Accenture. So I have a mix of consulting as well as in-house experience. I'm an author of 3 books, and the most recent one is called Inclusive Internal Communication, which just got published. I haven't really announced it officially. It's out there. And I worked in India, in UK briefly with Tesco, and now in Poland. So that's a big summary about me.
Fantastic. And I can certainly vouch for your writing. I follow your LinkedIn weekly newsletter, so some fabulous content in that. And David, last but not least.
Hi everyone, my name is David Bowman. I'm a product director for Content and Cloud. Coming at things from a tech perspective today. My background is delivering intranets, mostly working with our customers in internal communications to deliver intranets, make sure that we're connecting all of the normal human beings in organizations with all of the great technology that Microsoft particularly are making available to organizations.
Fantastic. So everybody on the call, if you love or loathe Microsoft, this is your chance to pick David's brains and to maximize the time to find out what you could or should be doing with tools that might be at your disposal. But Joanna, thank you for your introductions. Lovely team, nice and succinct. I'm going to start with you, Joanna. Can you share some examples of key performance indicators, the lovely KPIs that internal comms should or could be thinking about to track measurement and performance effectively? There we go. I know.
Yeah.
You.
So I teach a class on strategic internal comms, and my students always ask me about, like, what do I measure and how do I measure? And it seems very mysterious and difficult because we're not mathematicians and we're not data scientists. But I think we can overcomplicate it and we can make it harder than it seems. And I think people kind of default to measuring stuff around reach. So open rates, click rates, how many people attend a thing. And that tells you about the reach of your comms, but it doesn't really tell you about the impact. So my advice would be, when you're thinking about setting KPIs or communications objectives or figuring out what to measure, go back a step. Your first step should be to understand your business strategy. So in the organization you work in, what is that organization trying to achieve at a really high level? Is it more market share? Is it more sales? Is it higher customer retention or loyalty? And then work backwards from there. How is communication going to support the business in achieving those goals? So say, for example, your company wants to sell more products. Then you have to think about, well, how can I, as a communicator, support my company to sell more products? And maybe the sales team need more communication about the product or about new features. So that's what you're going to measure. You're going to look at, okay, well, I'm going to do communications campaigns with this target audience. And then I'm going to measure their level of understanding of the product before I do that, and then after. So maybe you want to have a 20% increase in the knowledge of the product or the new features or whatever it is. And then you can extract that further and say, well, actually, at the end of the year, did it actually drive sales? Did I play a part in that? So it's really to start linking not just how many people looked at things or attended things, but like what's the link up to the business strategy? That would be my advice.
Okay, great start there. Aniisu, does that spark any thoughts for you? I saw you nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think great points which Joanna called out. So I think it's important to also understand that people are busy in organizations, and they, measurement is the last thing on their minds. And therefore, it's important for us to educate stakeholders about what measurement is really about, because most of them focus only on the outtakes, how open rates and read rates and click-throughs and all of that. And they don't really think about the outcomes and the organizational impact, like Joanna mentioned. So it's important to help them appreciate what measurement is and how it can be done, and then connect the dots to the big picture. So help them appreciate how it really falls in line. And it's also about collaboration, because you need to take them through this journey of measuring, because not everyone is familiar with it. People are scared of data, and all of that comes in the way of actually using measurement in the right way. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, it'd be interesting to hear from our audience. Again, drop that into the chat. The point about linking it to business strategy, is that happening in your organization already? Is that something you haven't considered before? Just do put your comments in there. So Aniisu, staying with you for a moment, how can internal communicators build relationships with key stakeholders? We talked a little bit before this call, but to ensure that their measurement efforts are aligned with the needs of the organization, how would you approach that?
Well, I think it's important to first establish that relationship in terms of helping them appreciate the overarching comm strategy, where obviously measurement is a key part. And then also engaging and communicating with them on a regular basis, showing them proof that yes, measurement can be used for better decision making, and also showing them the progress as you do a campaign, you roll out org-wide initiatives. You kind of indicate how measurement is adding value, and therefore giving them the confidence that yes, it makes sense. And that's when relationships get built, and they also appreciate the value that you're bringing to the table.
Luke Bottomley is just commenting, saying the challenge seems to be attributing the outcome to the comms effort. And in his experience, leaders understand the big picture, but often can't see where the comms contributed directly. Can you hone in on that? Any advice to Luke to share with his leadership team?
Well, I think there are two parts to it. One is, of course, the credibility of the comms team, and how much have you established, inside the organization, and B, how can you help understand the business better so that you can take them through the entire progress and the journey of it. Like Joanna mentioned, it's also about helping understanding what's the end goal, and therefore connecting your purpose of as an internal communicator to that overarching company goal.
Fantastic. David, I should have come to you earlier about KPIs. You are our Mr. Measurement and Tools. Can you answer that question that I first gave to Joanna? And what KPIs should internal comms be thinking about?
Yeah, and look, I completely agree with with all the points so far about kind of linking your KPIs back to objectives. I think in our experiences still, internal comms often find themselves in situations where the platforms that they're using can't give them the analytics that they need. And I think when you're challenged by the senior stakeholders in the organization for what contribution internal comms is making to the business, if you haven't got those basic statistics about page views on the intranet or click-throughs from emails, missing that information can dent your credibility to be able to kind of demand more and kind of ask for greater involvement in kind of being able to deliver the organization strategy. So I think it is important to make sure that you've got those basics in place. I think the kind of holy grail that organizations that we're working with are looking for is that kind of user-generated content, right? Having employees sharing, liking, and kind of directly feeding back on content that's being created. If you've got there and you've got an organization of people that is happy to share content on those platforms internally, I think it's demonstrative that you've got a good KPI.
Yes, Katrina's saying yes, interactivity is a great sign. Do you think we can get too bogged down in this? So there was an interesting comment in the LinkedIn thread around in the run up to this event that we can get a bit obsessed with the data, and actually we should be drawing back from it and actually really thinking about what people are feeling and thinking and the conversations they're having. So I'm challenging you on this. I know data's your thing, but is there a balance to be had?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I think you've got to have a good mix of both of those things, right? The data is going to inform, it's going to give you the fact base to look at. It's going to give you some data points to go back to. But I think making sure that you've got you understand the narrative and the feedback and the feelings from people, that having a good balance of both of those things is going to be really important for developing a good comm strategy, particularly if the intranet is your main source, is your main channel for people to go to.
Yeah, I like that idea that it's the facts, it's the rational, it's almost the IQ, and then the emotional intelligence side through qual research and qual feedback can be a counterbalance to that. Amy's just made a point saying she's found that getting senior leaders on board from the start helps present on all staff calls or directly to them about the campaign and get them involved where possible, e.g. filming videos and writing short blogs. So yeah, nice point from Amy there. Thank you. Joanna, coming back to you, how do you know what to measure when you're developing an internal comms strategy? We've talked a little bit about it, but can you talk particularly about the impact of internal comms on the delivery of business strategy and setting smart objectives?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to touch on Luke's comment there, actually, because I thought that was quite interesting, where he said it's hard to attribute the outcome to communication efforts, and leaders don't see the connection. And I would say that is our job to do that. So, we are communicators. One of the things you need to do is to communicate to your leadership team what your contribution is. Like, you need to know that yourself, and you need to communicate that in a way that they will understand. So treat them as any other audience. What motivates them, what frustrates them. So, for example, if you go in to a leadership group and you're talking comms language, all about channels and audiences, you will lose them. But if you speak in a more commercial language and you speak in the language of the business and tell a compelling story where you've got data and you've got stats and you've got the ammunition, then you're speaking their language. So treat them as any target audience that you would, and that will really help your credibility.
In the words,
and then on your question, go on.
So I was just going to echo that in the words of Liam Fitzpatrick, who many of you in the call probably know, internal comms and guru and author, his quote, which he says he got from somebody else, but he can't remember who it was, but arrive with data, leave with respect, which is such a good thing to remember. And yes, speaking the language of those around the board table is so important for internal comms, as we know. But yes, I interrupted you. We're going to come back on the SMART objectives.
Yeah, so the SMART objectives framework is, actually I saw someone on LinkedIn recently saying, throw SMART objectives in the bin, they're terrible. And I was mildly outraged, which I suspect is what they wanted with that clickbait title. So for anyone who doesn't use the SMART methodology, it's where you write an objective that is specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant, and it's timely. And the key bits for this, for me, that I see, say, my students or other communicators make, is that we don't get specific enough. So like, be really specific in the thing you're trying to do. It's usually that you're trying to make somebody do something or change their behavior. Make it achievable. This is the worst thing that I do. Like, I always try to do the Rolls Royce approach when it's just me, Billy, no mates with no team. It's not achievable. And put a time limit on it. So, when you're saying to your manager or to your leadership team, we're going to do this is going to take 6 months or 24 months or whatever it is. If you use that methodology and do all of your objectives with that, put them in a time frame and say, we're going to move the needle from 10% to 40% or whatever it is. Again, that gives you more credibility and also gives you a lot more focus for what you need to spend your time on, and everything else you just say no.
I love that. Credibility and focus, everything else just say no. That's going to be a t-shirt slogan, I think. Communicators, fantastic. Aniisu, anything to come back on there particularly, or before I go on to ask another question of you?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So how can internal comms use metrics such as internal NPS and customer satisfaction to demonstrate the impact of internal comms? So getting really into a niche here around business outcomes.
Right. So I guess the starting point is to establish a baseline. Most of the organizations, don't really have something which is agreed among stakeholders as what a baseline would be. And then you can, of course, build on it. And then you set your goals, you articulate your communication effort, you monitor progress, you connect the metrics to the organizational goals of, say, customer loyalty, engagement, retention, whatever those metrics are. But primarily, if you don't have that baseline, it's obviously difficult. And of course, NPS can be used for events, it can be used for campaigns, you can figure out perceptions, you can do all kinds of different metrics. But in fact, one interesting example which I wanted to share with you all is that we, in one organization where I work, we were measuring email open rates and read rates and all of that, and it always felt like the comms team was responsible for it, and it felt like, hey, that's your ownership. Why aren't people watching or reading the mails? We turned it around by looking at the engagement scores of teams, and we split it by teams and by business leader. And then we looked at whether the engagement score was mapping with the open rates and read rates. And we could clearly see that teams which were highly engaged were the ones who were opening their mails. And so we turned the table and said, hey, look, as a leader, it's your responsibility to make sure that your teams are reading the basic messages that are going out. And if you don't do that, you can't really then complain about things not being available or accessible. So I think that's an example which I felt would really resonate with people here.
Yeah, sure, and I'm sure that lots of people in the audience have had similar experiences. David, I can see that's music to your ears. Open emails and results happen. So tell us, what do you think, in your experience, people are missing a trick with the tool and the suite of software tools they might already have? What are the common omissions they're making, would you say?
Yeah, so look, I'm coming at this from a Microsoft partner angle. So I'm a full advocate of everything that Microsoft are up to. I think for people that are aware of the Microsoft Viva Suite that was released last year, there's a brand new set of tools and applications being released by Microsoft under the Viva Employee Experience umbrella. And I think the tools, the applications, the vision for Microsoft Teams as this overall kind of employee operating system, I think there's a really neat vision in there. I think the challenge that organizations have still is that these are point solutions ultimately. They add up or can add up to a digital workplace, and there's analytics brought into a lot of those platforms. I think the challenge that, again, if intranet is your main place that people are going, visiting to find content, the analytics are in lots of different applications, and it can drive you mad as an internal communicator trying to navigate around the different places where analytics and data exist, because it's in bits and pieces. It can be quite difficult to create a kind of holistic view about how people are using the technology. So I think the answers are in there, but without some experience and expertise, they can be very difficult. And look, I think the same is going to be true of any technology, right? Unless you've got a good handle on your objectives and your audience, ultimately the technology is going to be an enabler, right? The better informed you are with what you're trying to achieve and what people are going to accept, the more likely it is that your technology is going to work, and it's going to give you what you need.
So where do I go to get that experience? If I were leading internal comms team now and felt there was a deficiency in our team's understanding of the suite of tools we've got, what do we do? Where do we go? I
would get in touch with Content and Cloud through LinkedIn or through our website. I think that's probably my firm recommendation for anyone that's struggling on this today. I think finding an organization that you can work with, that you can build a good partnership with, and that you can lean on to give you the experience that you need, because Microsoft isn't going away. Usage of things like Teams and SharePoint is exploding all the time. Their recent announcements about AI mean that these tools are going to be prevalent in all organizations. And I think it becomes really important as internal communicators, even if you aren't using Microsoft 365 for your intranet platform, to understand a little bit more about what employees are likely to be shown or have enabled for them by the IT department.
We've mentioned the AI word. I wondered when it would come in. We planned this call back in March, and things have developed apace. It'd be great to hear in the comments people's experience with AI and how it's impacting on their work streams within internal comms. So please do put some comments in there. Joanna, do tools drive you nuts? I saw you nodding when David said it can drive you mad, the range of stuff that's there. What's your experience of measurement been?
I think tools are tools. I think they're not a magic bullet. that people often think that they are. I think Dave made a good point there. If you don't understand your audience and you don't have clear objectives, I mean, the tool won't do anything. I mean, I remember when I was leading comms in the police, we had set up a really good newsletter. We used a tool called Populo. And like the tool was really good, but the newsletter was really great because we had very strict governance over it. I had a professional writer. We agonized over the images and the subject lines, and we said no to loads of stuff that wasn't relevant. And we crafted the hell out of it. That's what made it really good. But I had other government departments ringing me and saying, oh, what's this? I need this tool. And I was explaining about the tool, and I was like, you also need content creators, editorial planning. And they were like, oh, no, we don't have any of that. So the tool is grand, but you need the expertise and the investment of time and energy. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Okay, tool plus expertise equals success. Okay. What about borrowing or enjoying measurements from other parts of the business and how you feed that into the internal comms campaigns? What's your approach to that, Joanna?
Yeah, I love doing a bit of this. And I think internal communicators who aren't using metrics from around the business, like, you're missing a trick. So let me give you an example, actually. Let's go back to the police, because when I worked in the police had to wear face masks, say, in certain scenarios, like at public desks in the police stations or attending different crime scenes. And there was all these new rules they had to comply with. And we had a health and safety team from HR was going around doing spot checks to check, like, what is the compliance level with this face mask wearing. So I heard that they were doing this, and I was like, okay, tell me what your results are from that spot check. Give me the data. So I had a baseline, and it wasn't great. And then we developed a really good communications campaign, really focused on the wearing of face masks and this behavior change. And then the next time they went and did their spot check, that was like the measurement after the campaign. So I wasn't actually collecting that data, but I could see the impact of our communications campaign by borrowing their metrics. So it went from something like 30% compliance up to 65 in like a month. And then you're able to extrapolate further than that and then say, well, now let's go much higher level and look at, are less police officers calling out sick because of COVID? Are there less of them in isolation? Can we actually link it to like performance of the whole organization? And again, they're not my metrics, they belong in HR. So if you work in internal comms, firstly, you need to make really good friends with HR and with IT. You can't succeed without them, but also think about how you're going to measure the impact of what you're doing and not just the activity.
That's really sound advice. Anybody in the audience already doing that? Have they really invested in their relationships and are getting business metrics and measurements from other parts of the business? Please put your comments in and share case studies. That would be great to hear. And that curiosity, I think you're very well placed as head of internal comms to ask questions and to span those silos that can exist within organisations. So a really nice case study that you've shared there. Thanks, Joanna. Aniisu, I would love to ask you now, looking at employees across all levels of organisation, how can you ensure, encourage, cajole to make sure that they're involved in the internal comms effort? What are your strategies and thoughts on that?
Absolutely. No, I think and again, this is something which I've articulated in my most recent book, Inclusive Internal Communication, where I think we tend to believe that internal communicators or communicators know it all, and we tend to try to control the entire process and how it's shaped. I think it's important to start involving employees early in the journey of measuring. So even in terms of even crafting how the measurement metrics can be put together, taking the help for increasing the reach and coverage of the measurement tools that we're using, or even involving them in pre-testing some of the questions and checking that it's working fine before you roll it out across the organization. So I think it's important to trust employees first, believe that they can add value to comms, even though of course we do have a greater understanding of the mechanics of it. But I think it's important to get them involved early, get them to get their ideas, crowdsource some great suggestions and feedback, and then it's an iterative process. And it's also when employees start seeing that you're using the data and coming back to them with insights, that's when they trust you even more. So I think these are some of the strategies which will help build trust and also get them invested in the measurement process.
Great, so it's creating that trust loop, seeing the output from their efforts and that back into the overall success. We've got a couple of comments coming here. Samantha Springer saying, to Joanna's point about working closely with HR, but she worked much less so with IT, so that's been a really good tip for her, so thank you. And Janvi Joshi saying making friends with IT is one big one, since a lot of employee data comes from digital channels. So yeah, really, if there's one takeaway that you can scribble today, it's get close to IT. David, in your experience, who are you talking to within organisations? Is it simply channeled through IT and internal comms, or do you have a broader reach? And are you getting a sense that more organisations are understanding the importance of measurement across the entire workforce?
Yes. You know, I think one of the biggest shifts that I've seen in my time delivering intranet projects, particularly with customers, is, you know, 5 to 10 years ago, our main customers were in IT, right? And, you know, IT firmly believing that they were the ones that had the mandate and could drive employee engagement. Not that it was referred to in that way back then. The major change we've seen now is, you know, I think IT departments generally accept that they have a role to play in this, and it's an important role, but they aren't going to be the ones responsible for delivering an outcome. You know, that needs to absolutely be, you know, more business departments that are much more in tune with the audience and the people and the narrative of the organization. So, you know, I think that's probably the biggest change that I've seen in the time that I've been delivering intranet projects with customers.
Okay. Joanna, coming back to you, you've done a really lovely case study with the police and the mask wearing. Can you give me an example of where you've felt there was poor practice and you've helped move it into best practice? And I'm putting you on the spot there.
You are. I'll be careful now what I say. I'll get myself in trouble.
You don't have to name the organisation, but just to show the contrast of what good can look like from a position of perhaps not being in the best shape.
Yeah, let me give you an example actually of the newsletter that was in the police when I joined, because there was one. Now I joined, I was the first head of internal communication they'd ever had in 100 years, actually. No pressure, but they had kind of, you know, that sort of ad hoc, they had bits and pieces. So they had someone kind of doing an organizational wide newsletter. And when I went in and looked at it, for me, it didn't work for two reasons. One was the mechanics of it. So you'd get an email and it would say the newsletter is out, click here. That click would bring you to the intranet, and then it would say the newsletter is here, click here, and you'd click again. It would open a PDF, and then to read each different article, it was a picture, and you'd have to click on that, and then it was awful, very unfriendly, very unintuitive. And then the content I found problematic as well, because there was no tone of voice, stuff was quite long and repetitive, and because they didn't have anyone really doing it, people were just sending in stuff, and it was getting put in the newsletter. So I workshopped this with a load of police officers who didn't know why I was asking all these questions, but worked through like the basic stuff. They want stuff that's relevant. They're really busy. They don't have time to read long stuff, like get to the point. So we brought in this tool so we could make it like land in people's inbox. It didn't even need to like double click the email. It would all be there, and spend ages on the content in terms of what gets included, what doesn't. I put a really strict word count. Anything on the front page of this newsletter was 200 words or less, which people hated at the start. And then I was able to demonstrate, well, actually 16,000 people are reading this twice a week. So it's working. So let's do this.
Fabulous.
So I think it's about identifying the problem, start with the problem, and then listen to your stakeholders and your audience, see what they need, and then come up with the solution based on that, and like stick to your guns.
Fantastic. Please do admit in the chat function, have you got a problem newsletter, a problem channel at the moment? We can be your saviors by giving you some top tips. So do shout out if you've got something that's bugging you that you want to turn into best practice. Aniisu, can I come to you? How would you help people on this call to advocate for increased investment in measurement? What are your thoughts on that? Tricky one.
Yeah, I think the first step would be to understand the perceptions within the organization about measurement, and how do stakeholders really perceive it? Do they really think it's important? Do they not? So if you get a understanding of that, you can then move the needle in terms of where you want them to be. The second part, of course, is as a function and as a team and as a leader or communicator, where are you with your own credibility within the system to influence stakeholders to think about measurement a lot more intently. And the third would be, of course, how do you demonstrate that, yes, measurement can really help them make better decisions? Can the metrics help them change behavior? Can it improve how they look at their sales process or drive trainings? So that there has to be a clear understanding of how you can change the narrative within. And if they can see that happening over time, then it really makes the process easier and simpler. And the last thing I would also call out is something about consistency. So if you are consistently sending out a dashboard saying, here's where we are, these are some of the metrics of the channels, this is where we are doing well, where we are not doing well, where we can improve, and this is where we need your help to make a difference. And I think that's also appreciated because people can then see tangible change over time, and that can help enhance the relationship better.
That's some really clear pointers there. David, anything you would add in terms of trying to drive investment?
Yeah, so I think that one of the points already made about making sure that the kind of presentation of this is being put into the language of the CFO, the CEO, the CIO, and bringing some of those people along the journey as well. I think often we've started projects or gone in to begin a project and a bit of analysis work on who the main stakeholders are in the organization, what are their objectives, what are they trying to achieve in the next kind of 6 to 12 to 24 months, activities, programs of work that they've got on, and just finding ways of being able to help them out, creating that kind of goodwill towards supporting the intranet project by making sure that it is aligned as possible with other initiatives that are going on in the organization. And I think the point about being BFFs with the IT department will become much more important for organizations that are on a strategic program of work in their IT department to either put something like the Microsoft 365 platform in or another technology, and just understanding what's on the roadmap, what are they struggling with, what are they launching to end user community, and just being able to kind of keep all of those things in mind as you're kind of planning a delivery of a project like this.
Are you sensing, are there lots of rapid conversations happening about AI, and is there a sense of fear, a sense of hope? What's the temperature, would you say?
I think for me, it's mostly what we've seen so far is curiosity. We have a couple of customers that have active requirement in this area, so they are exploring specific scenarios. I think for most customers, it is a wait and see. I think worries about data protection and privacy, are kind of driving a little bit of hesitancy for a lot of organizations until they understand, where's my data going? How far can I allow people to use these technologies? So, I think there is early exploration, but I think a lot of organizations are still taking a, wait and see. I think, again, I'm at risk of sounding like a Microsoft shill. I think the announcements of Microsoft around their AI platform, I think they've got a really good handle on how to create mass adoption of these technologies.
Joanna, I see you nodding. Give me your thoughts on AI and measurement for internal communicators.
I love a bit of AI, actually. I can hear, when I talk to lots of communicators, kind of fall into two buckets. There's the people who want to be the early adopters, and they're like, what are the tools I can play with? Let's have a look. Let's have a conversation about all these different things. And then there's the people who tend to be the very creative types who just feel a bit threatened and go, oh God, this is going to take my job. I don't like this. I think that AI isn't going to take your job as a communicator, but somebody using AI probably will. Like if I was interviewing two candidates and one of them had played with loads of AI tools and was like really looking into the future, versus the other one who was going, no, I don't touch that. I know which one I pick if they were otherwise the same. I was actually playing with an AI tool yesterday. I'm going to do a blog on it because I have to show you the pictures that came out. It's a headshot generator, which I think is going to be brilliant for organizations. I wanted a new headshot for LinkedIn, didn't really want to pay 200 quid and go into Dublin City to get it. So I went onto this new tool. I think it cost me about €40. And I had to upload a load of pictures of myself. And then it spat me out an hour later, 400 headshots of myself, of which I would say 300 are probably great and like useful. Actually, one of them was on my LinkedIn just from yesterday, and some of them are like the funniest pictures of myself that I've ever seen. I'm going to put some of them on my blog because they're hilarious. But I think the point is, don't be scared of it. Like, dip your toe in. There's a good website called, I think it's called Future Tools. It's got like 1,000+ AI tools. You can search by keywords, ones to support you doing podcast writing, content generation, noise cancellation. I would say dip your toe in and have a go. Don't be afraid.
Fantastic, great advice there. We'll probably have to do a whole separate session on AI. Nikki Dyson says, I saw your LinkedIn image update. That's so cool that you made it with AI. So already a fan there. Aniisu, what's the word on the street in Poland around AI measurement and tools for internal communicators?
Well, I think it's a bit more conservative in this part of the world. People are still figuring things out. And I'm also hearing, at least from the India context, there's a lot of fatigue around AI. I think there's just too many tools. People are overwhelmed. And I guess, yes, like Joanna mentioned, the early adopters who are, playing around with it are, at least making attempts to use it in the right way. But yeah, it's still a long way. But I think some of these established tools like Microsoft 365 and all of that have already integrated some of this. So if it's part of the working tools, then it's far easier to leverage some of these aspects of AI.
Okay, I'm going to stay with you for a moment and just come off the AI for a moment, because I think that is another whole section, another event at some point. So I'm just going to bring it back to the measurement specifically. What advice would you give around balancing the need to measure communication effectiveness with the need to maintain employee trust and privacy? Can you delve into that for me a little?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think fundamentally, inside organizations, when you ask people for feedback, if the organization's culture is not open and transparent and people don't trust each other enough, then there is that fear and resistance to participating in some of these surveys, and therefore you may not get the right kind of information. So it's also important to give people the choice of staying anonymous while they fill in the feedback. So at least you get the right data, but even if you don't know who they are, that's one part. The other is, of course, give them the option of opt-in, give them the option of, engaging in ways in which they feel comfortable. So it could be focus groups, it could be online surveys, it could be a bot, figuring out measurement, or asking the right questions so that you can get the data in that sense. So I think there is also the need for looking at these third-party tools which are GDPR compliant. So at least you can confidently tell stakeholders that yes, the data that you're sending in is going to be used appropriately. So I guess these would be some of the ways, because there is always the fear that some of this data can be misused and maybe used for the wrong purposes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Joanna, any trust and privacy pointers you wanted to pick up on there?
I think, as Aniisu was saying earlier, it's about kind of that ongoing building of trust with your audience. I see lots of organizations, they do the big annual engagement survey and they ask 60 questions and then they do nothing with it. And then kind of October rolls around and they panic and they go, oh God, we have to ask them again. We didn't do anything. And they do that sort of, you said, we did, look, we did stuff. But then, then they wonder why the response rates are low. And you're like, Jesus, lads, just don't do the survey this year. Look at what you got last year. Take some action. And then you talk about that. And you won't even need to do a communications campaign to say, you said, we did. Because people will know. They'll feel it. And they'll feel the difference in their jobs. So some of it's common sense, isn't it? Sorry, I'm off on one now.
No, I love that. My personal mission is to say death to the annual engagement survey, and it's much more about what's happening right now and not 15 months retrospectively. So yes, I'm completely championing that viewpoint. David, any thoughts on trust and privacy? That must be a big component of how you train people on tools and how to maintain that sense of trust within an organization.
Yeah, and look, I think for organizations where the culture of the business is one of open transparency, people are highly engaged, my guess is that these issues will be a lot less difficult to have conversations with employees because they're kind of already in the sort of safety zone I think for organizations where the culture of the business isn't particularly supportive of open discussion and kind of being sort of failure advocates, right? It's okay to try things and get them wrong as you learn lessons. If those cultures aren't there, these are going to be very difficult things to begin a conversation with employees on. And look, I think one of the things that good analytics gives you is problems to solve. Identifying that long rambling posts from the exec are a problem for employees, or that people can't access, that the technology is a bit crap and people can't log in. If you're not able to resolve those problems, it's best maybe to not go looking for the information in the first place.
I really like that. Good analytics gives you the problems to solve. That's a really good one to land. Good analytics give you problems to solve. So it's not just seeing the data, it's then truly taking action and creating change.
And that is particularly challenging if your internal comms team is one person, or is a sort of split resource amongst a lot of different people. Great analytics might not be getting great analytics might not be the best objective to start a project with, right? Looking at resourcing of the team, I think would probably be the place that I would start there.
Well, I love Joanna's idea of workshopping it. So asking police officers in that case, not necessarily understanding perhaps why they're there to workshop that, but the outputs from that inform how you then improve stuff. So yeah, resonating with that completely. Aniisu, can you give me some strategies for measuring the impact of internal comms on organisational cultural values? What's your approach to that?
Right. So I think it's important to understand that inside the organization, if you want the measurement to be inclusive of people, so you need to probably look at a stratified sampling so that you are covering the right audiences. Also, you need to look at from a tone of voice, like Joanna mentioned, whether it's right, what are the keywords, are there biases even in the questions that we are asking, and are we really touching all the diverse population that we have? So I think that would help, change some of the thinking about how we approach, measurement from a cultural standpoint. Yeah.
Okay, Joanna, any experience or intel to share on how you've approached measuring culture and values within businesses?
I think values is an interesting one because it's about behaviors and it's about how we act. And the nice thing about behaviors is that they are generally observable and therefore measurable. I think the place that organizations sometimes falls down in terms of values, and this isn't necessarily sit with the communications team, but rather with the leadership team, is they come up with a set of values and they go, aren't these great? And then they go, oh, vaguely means this, like integrity, do the right thing. But they never really get really specific in terms of what are the behaviors that we would reward under that, and what are the behaviors that we wouldn't tolerate, actually, that are counter to that value. And then weave that into performance management, that every manager is speaking about these things. That's the only way you can measure it. So I'd be very loathed as an internal communicator, whether you're a big team or one, as taking that on as something that you own, because actually that's owned by every manager and every leader in the organization.
Okay, we're galloping through so many varied topics here. I'm interested if there are any questions from the audience. Please do chip in. We've got these three very experienced panelists here, so do use their time wisely and come up with your questions. I've got a million more I can be asking, but I'd love to hear from you as well. What about the future, David? Can you tell us about some of the trends that you're seeing and what the future might hold if you were to gaze into the crystal ball on measurement and tools?
Well, I'm going to mention AI again as a sort of an obvious place that lots of attention is being poured into at the moment. We're all sort of waiting to see what our new robot overlords want from us. In some ways, I think that the sort of, maybe the more serious point to make is that the problem of intranets and analytics and engagement, hasn't really changed significantly. I think COVID was obviously a huge influence on that in more recent times, but the problems associated with delivering this hasn't gone away. I think what has changed is the computing power in order to be able to analyze the data that is available from how people are working, where they're working, when they're working, who they're working with, what they're working on. There is a huge amount of processing power that's available to us, and that can be done now through relatively simple interfaces. And I think this is going to have an impact on the way that we measure and think about productivity in our organizations. I think the other lens that we're seeing this through is the sort of Microsoft lens. Recent stats that we've seen on this, Microsoft have 300 million monthly active users in Teams now. I mean, these are incredible usage and statistics, and it's increasingly difficult for people to avoid Microsoft as part of their employee engagement strategy, because it's such a big part of organizations' IT business.
We've had a question from S Burner 1. I'm sure that's not your name, but that's your labeled name, so I'll refer to you as that. So from what you've all shared today, what would be the top things? So let me pin you down to say top 3 things or measures to include in a regular internal comms dashboard, if you were to approach it with a best practice hat on. And it's Sherry. Thank you, Sherry. So Joanna, can I come back to you? The top 3 things you would have, if you were limited to 3, what would you ensure was on your dashboard to measure?
Sure. Hi, Sherry. I think my starting point would be to highlight the mistake that I see a lot of communicators make, is to get very focused on outputs and not kind of focused on outcomes. And I remember earlier in my career, I got very confuddled by these terms, but very simply, outputs is like the stuff that you're doing, like the activity, and outcomes is the result of that activity. And I think internal communicators often just want to measure the open rates, the click rates. 100 people came to the town hall, 50 people read that blog, but that doesn't really tell you about the impact. So say you were working with IT and they were like, oh, we're getting loads of people opening these dodgy emails, we need to do a phishing campaign. Like, definitely measure the rate of like how many people are opening those at the moment. And maybe you want to measure something like how many people are ringing the IT help desk or logging tickets to get help for that, to get your baseline before you do anything. Then you do your communications campaign, and then at the end measure the same thing. And hopefully what you'd like to see is that the number of people opening those dodgy emails goes down, and probably what you want to see is actually an increase in the number of tickets or phone calls into IT, because people are more aware of it and they want to get that help. So I think it's not so much about having a list of things you can put on a dashboard, but think about having a mix of both outputs and outcomes and make it make sense for your business strategy.
Lovely. Outputs and outcomes. Aniisu, you're nodding. Anything to add? What would your top 3 be?
Well, I would look at it from a different perspective. I think there is, from the audience. So who's the audience you're going to share this dashboard with? So if it's the leadership team, then what are they really going to be interested in? So is it the strategic priorities and how we're progressing, and what's the perception inside the organization about those strategic priorities? So that would be one approach to take. So of course, then you would need to see, if you are looking at, say, the manager community, then, what are they interested in? Is it that the channels are working well? Is it about the content? Is it about the campaigns that you're running? So it could be the NPS scores that you generate from, the surveys that you do. So I think if you look at these, the dashboard from this particular aspect of who the audience is and what they really need, then you can have a different way of segmenting the report, and therefore the dashboard becomes much more meaningful for the audience.
Great, thank you. And David, so blank canvas, thinking about an internal comms team that's starting from scratch, got that lovely blank canvas in front of them. What would you recommend they have as part of their dashboard?
I'm going to go with some maybe more boring items of things like things you can make decisions about, right? So when is the data that gives you an indicator of when the best time to publish something is going to be? Is 9 a.m. on a Tuesday a good time to publish content? Things like a kind of user journey or flows indicating, if you pointed this thing at the homepage, where are people going next, right? What if you could point it at the menu in the office canteen, right? You'd see that a lot of people are visiting that. How do they get there and where are they going next? I think that would be the things that I could make decisions about, right? Important times of day, how are people using it, where are they going afterwards? And maybe something like a kind of total addressable audience, right? If you've got a platform that not everybody in your organization is able to access, understanding how far you are from the absolute total number of employees is another good measure of how successful your content is being.
Okay. So big focus on numbers, as we'd expect with the Microsoft hat on. Joanna, what if we came to the qual side of things? How do you approach that within your current organisation or previous roles?
Great question, actually, because at the moment I am investing pretty much this week and next week in focus groups, and I'm not really doing anything else. So we are looking at refreshing the vision, mission, and values of the organisation. So I'm bringing together focus groups from all around the organisation to listen. And I love your question. Who sent that in? Oh, maybe that came from you. About qualitative data. Like, how do you capture qualitative data? So if you are, say you're a team of one, you don't have a scribe, you don't have an assistant, you need to run a focus group, pay attention, be engaged, be the host, be engaging and on, but you also need to capture all the information. So you can record it and get the transcription if you want. I feel like people don't necessarily feel they can be totally honest and truthful and candid if it's being recorded. What I did for this one, because I was wondering about this, I actually developed like a collaborative document just using Word, hosted on OneDrive, and I designed a template. I call it like a worksheet. So, you know, when we're talking about the purpose, I have a big box and I have everyone's name in it, and we have a chat, and then I say, okay, let's do a silent brainstorm. Put down all your thoughts. You've got your name there. People will type in all the stuff, and then we'll have a chat about it after. And I can kind of type a few notes as people are chatting. But it means I have a really good captured document that has most of the key thoughts in it. So I can mostly just pay attention and chat with people rather than trying to write down everything that people says. I just invented that this week. I'm delighted with it because it's working really well.
Is that something you'd be happy to share, or is that IP?
Yeah, yeah,
Wonderful.
I can do that.
We'll let that shared. Caroline Carana said Miro is great for that too. So another top tip there.
Yeah, Miro is good. It's just the processing and the analysis of the is more difficult for Miro. So once I had everything in Word, it was actually easier. I was thinking, how do I make my life easy? And then in the analysis phase. But yeah, they do the same thing.
Okay. We run focus groups as well, and I felt the sort of stress rising as you described all the things you have to do if you're one individual managing a focus group of 8 to 10 people. So I like your idea. I'd love to see your document. Sherry has come back just to the earlier point around outputs. She's been guilty of outputs in different roles and teams and tried to get really smart on the outcomes. And so this session's really helped her to focus again on her newish role. So big shout out from Sherry. Thank you, Joanna, on that. Aniisu, any more thoughts on qual data? What's best practice and how you capture it and make best use of that time?
Well, I think one point I would add is get the leadership team involved when the process of qualitative findings are being dug up, because often the insights are taken to the leadership team and they may not really value it unless they sense it for themselves or they feel the pulse on the ground. So getting them to participate in some of these focus groups opens their eyes as to what's really happening on the ground, so that grassroots feel is so crucial. So I think that's very, very important. And I've seen that really work because it changes their perception about the comms team and the measurement part, and the fact that, yes, there is a lot missing from what they understand at the CXO level versus what's happening on the ground.
Okay, excellent. And then I'm going to put this out and one of you can choose who to answer. I won't be so prescriptive, but I'm interested in what you've seen since COVID in terms of practice with measurement. What trends have you seen? What's shifted in the roles that you've had or the organisations you're advising? So during lockdown and now where we find ourselves in 2023, have there been any significant changes in A, what you measure, and B, what you're seeing amongst different cultures? Who would like to take that?
I can
take it on. Great, David, go ahead.
So I think an example or a couple of examples of maybe kind of pushback from organizations on tracking things like employee productivity. So there are some tools and services that you can use to see how people are working, when they're attending meetings, and you can get an aggregation of the reports back that shows team by team how much time people are spending in meetings, for example. It's anonymized data, so you can't get to an individual level, but you can see an aggregation of team. And I think we've seen organizations getting quite a lot of pushback from employees on the use of that data. Particularly if it's an organization where there isn't a particularly, I don't want to sound too negative about it, but maybe more of an open culture, it feels a bit like spying rather than kind of improving well-being, which is often what that's driven as an initiative on. So I think that's maybe one element of being careful on how those initiatives land with employees. They may have the best intentions, but I would trial it with a smaller group before going to an entire organization.
That definitely hit the headlines, didn't it, back in the day around versus well-being. Any experience of that amongst our audience, or Joanna, putting the same to you? Any thoughts on monitoring productivity?
Oh God, I was at a really good conference there a couple of weeks ago in Lisbon, and the opening speaker talked about how the world of remote work and hybrid work is chaos and it's gone mad. And he had this great example of, he said, who would have thought that a mouse jiggler could be a thing? And someone had invented this thing to like keep their mouse jiggling so they were active on Teams. I think, since COVID, I wonder, is it slipping? I feel like during and just right after COVID, there was a better understanding of the need to invest in internal comms, and that would include the tools that you might need to, do a really good newsletter and measure if people are actually reading it, or invest in an intranet product. My sense is that this might be slipping, and I can see this in the types of job specs that I'm seeing coming out, where we want a team of one and you're going to deliver the whole strategy. You're also going to advise all our leaders. You're going to write everything. You're our videographer. You're also making the photographs. And by the way, you're also doing inclusion and diversity. I'm thinking, are we slipping back? Are people forgetting that this is important to know? It makes me a little bit nervous.
Interesting. Aniisu, any thoughts on productivity?
Well, I know there have been a lot of cases where, organizations have been pulled up for surveillance, and especially in IT companies where they go by the number of hours. Billing is important for the customer, and therefore they tend to push employees to work longer hours and be seated at their workstation. You can't really, so it is definitely eroding the trust within the organization. I think that's crucial. That's very, very it's happening a lot more, and especially after COVID. I can see that also there is a shift towards organizations valuing measurement and understanding it a lot more, because now there are more online tools and therefore you can measure it far, far easily than earlier. So I think those are some of the changes I'm seeing.
Okay. I've noticed a couple of people have to leave for a 2 o'clock meeting. We have got until 2:30. We can keep this call open. So do please stay. We'll wrap up around 2:25 to give you 5 minutes back before any 2:30 meetings. I've got a question which we haven't discussed before, but what would your top tips be? Let's start with you, Joanna. If you're onboarding a new, more junior recruit into the IC team, what would, using all your years of wisdom, be around how you induct them to the world of measurement and tools and techniques? What would the sort of 101 of that be for a junior joining the team?
That's a good question. That's a great question. I think be sensible. I think we can overload people in junior roles and expect too much. So I also believe in the power of great documentation, in a clear process, and in great clarity of expectations. So if you expect them to be involved in measurement, exactly what do you want them to do? How do you want them to do it? When do you want them to do it? And be very clear on what's expected. I think for junior roles, I'd be giving a lot of guidance, not to the point of micromanagement, but to the point of be really, really clear and quite prescriptive on how to do it. And then to sort of loosen that leash a little bit as they grow and mature, and push them a little bit and go, well, how do you think you'd measure this? And that's, I had a direct report in another job who, she was incredible, but she didn't know. So I kept having to push her to do things that she was really uncomfortable with. And then she'd be like, oh my God, I did it. So that sort of approach where you push and push a little bit more, and then they're off on their own. That maybe would be my approach.
Okay. And David, any other thoughts to add to that? If you
one of our customers, in fact, a retail organization in the US, have been growing their internal comms team. And a number of their new recruits have been straight from university, very kind of young graduate types. And the first thing they've been doing during their onboarding is out in the business, in their retail outlets, kind of learning how the organization works at the sharp end, because, you know, their business is all about people being in front of customers, in branches, on the shop floor. And they are the people in their organization that need information more than anyone else. So just making sure that their internal comms team kind of get it and they understand the pains and some of the challenges of working in a kind of first line role. So that, you know, I think that was a, you know, really successful kind of non-internal comms related, but helping to contextualize the business for them.
Okay, fantastic. And Aniisu, same question to you.
Well, I would echo what David mentioned about, you know, getting them immersed in the business first, because before they start doing measurement, I mean, it's important to understand how things work. But I would also give the individual a bit of autonomy to try something out, do a pilot or, you know, do a test case and see what they can come up with, because I'm always amazed at the you know, the talent and the creativity and the ideas that youngsters bring to the table, and we often, you know, we probably can't even match some of those ideas. So I would definitely try to test that out.
I love that sort of almost reverse mentoring. What ideas can you bring to the table and giving them that autonomy? Really nice. I hope that gets taken back out to the audience. I'm going to wrap up quite soon because I sense some people are wanting to jump off. But if you have got any questions, this is your time. Please do drop them into the chat now. We will pick up on them. But I'm going to ask each of you now in turn to, and I should have given you some warning on this. I haven't just sent it to you now. But I'm going to ask you, what advice would you give your younger self as you were starting your career in internal comms, specifically in reference to how you adopt best practice with measurement tools, evaluation? So if you could use all the learning that you've had over the last 2, 3, 4 decades, what would you say to your younger self? So David, any thoughts on that first?
I would, I think, develop a greater sense of how to contextualize my role for more senior people in the organization. You know, how to present to the CFO, you know, who's going to be the person that has to sign off any budget that I need for any project. How do I get this into a language that they're going to understand?
I really like that. Gosh, there's so much richness in this conversation over the last hour. Aniisu, what advice would you give your much younger self?
Well, I would think of you know, spending time understanding the problem, the pain points of the stakeholders, because most often you know, internal comms tends to work in the periphery, and that's not great. When you get deeper and immersed in what's happening around and understanding what the key challenges are, that's when you can start thinking of solutions, start thinking of ways to measure and evaluate and all of that. So I would, yeah, invest in that. I probably didn't do enough of it when I was younger.
Well, there's always time to catch up now, and I'm sure you're going great guns on that. And Joanna, what about you? What advice to your younger self?
I think I would tell my younger self that there actually is no such thing as best practice. And I think I spent a lot of my junior career focused on trying to do what's right. What are other people doing? I need to do the right thing. And actually, the best work I've ever delivered is listening intently to my audience and coming up with creative ideas myself and doing that. So I throw best practice in the bin and just like listen more than you speak would be what I would tell myself.
The classic, we have 2 ears, 1 mouth. Well, that is absolute music to my ears. We're all about listening better at Q&R as well. So I think that's a wonderful point to wrap up on. But I'm going to give you 30 seconds more in the audience. Is there any question you'd like to ask these 3 wonderful panelists? I can't see anything coming in. So I am going to wrap up and say thank you so much to all of you, Joanna, David and Dr. Verghese, for your time today. I think we've covered so much just within that topic of measurement, evaluation and tools, but we've strayed outwards from that as well. I hope our audience have enjoyed the content. This will be recorded, has been recorded, and it will be sent out to share with a wider audience too. So thanks once again. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons, and some lovely thank yous coming in on the chat there. So time well spent, I hope. Thanks. Bye.